But now we're going to switch to a different physical sense, and that's that we also rely on our skin to use, and that's the sense of touch. So that's what we're going to be focusing on now. Before we get into the sense of touch, I wanted to show you a slide of some animals that scientists are generally pretty interested in. We think they're pretty curious animals. So do you guys know these animals? How about this guy? Just shout them out. This guy, do you know? Star-nosed mole, excellent.
Naked mole.
This guy? Naked mole rat, perfect. This guy? Exactly, duck-billed platypus, yep. Okay, this guy is a little trickier. Can you guys get this one?
Duck.
Duck, perfect. Exactly, it's a duck. Yeah, so why do I have these all up on the same slide? Why do we care about these animals?
They must have something in common.
Yeah, okay, so what do they have in common? Why do I have them all up on the same slide? Sorry? So you can... No, speak up. I think you had it right.
They don't have any, like they can't feel them.
So that's close, but it's the opposite. So they have extreme senses of touch, and that's why we're super interested in them. So they have these really extreme senses of touch. The star-nosed mole has this star organ on its nose that it uses to interact with its environment. It uses it for finding prey, and it also uses it for figuring out where it is. And this star-nosed organ has, it's about the size of a human fingertip, and it's got 5 times more nerve endings than the whole human hand. So it's got a lot of sensory nerves here. The naked mole rat, it uses its incisors to interact. They're very touch-sensitive incisors to interact with the environment. Uses it to dig, to fight, to eat. And then it also has these hairs on its back and all around its body for orienting itself in these tunnels that it lives in underground. The duck-billed platypus has a very great sense of touch in its bill. And it also has these cells called electroreceptors, which are sensitive to the electric fields of prey. So since, with all of our nerves, we run on electricity. And using these electroreceptors, the duck-billed platypus can sense the electric fields given off by other animals to help catch prey. So it uses touch sensitivity in combination with electroreception to find prey. And the duck is the animal that we study in our lab, actually, for studying touch. It has an extremely touch-sensitive bill that it uses to find food. So if we were to compare a duck versus a chicken, think about them eating. What's the main difference that you can think of? How does a chicken eat? What do you think of when you think of a chicken eating? Yep, exactly. Here, show the whole class what you did. Exactly. So what's that behavior? What's that feeding behavior called? Pecking. Exactly. It's pecking. It's relying on its eyesight to see things on the ground to pick them up to eat them. And so it's what's known, a chicken is what's known as a visual forager. On the other hand, the duck doesn't use its eyesight. It uses a behavior called dabbling to feed. So here we have a picture. Have you guys seen this behavior before? So here's a picture of this behavior happening here. So it's not using its eyesight, it's just sticking its bill in and it's doing this dabbling motion where it's able to feel different sizes of food particles that are in murky water that it feeds on. So these are the animals we use in a lab, but for now we're going to talk a little bit more about how we feel touch. So touch is a very broad term, but there are lots of different types of touch. So can people just like spitball different types of touch that you can think of? Just anything, any different types of touch.
Pinch.
Yeah, like a pinch. Yep. So you got some pain in there and you got some stretch. Anything else?
Caress.
Like a caress, right? Like a gentle
Slap.
touch. A slap, right?
You know,
Yeah, like a. Anyone else? Lots of different types of touch. Sorry?
Holding something.
Yeah, like holding, exactly, yeah, holding something. No wrong answers here. Just. So like, how about I put the picture of the cat licking someone. I was just thinking of like, you can feel textures too, right? You have ways of feeling different types of textures. I put the cactus up there, so we've already talked a little bit about pain, but there are lots of different types of pain. You can feel like a puncturing pain or like a stretching pain, like a pinch. But stretch isn't always painful, right? So you have like, you might be able to stretch out your skin, feel something resting on you without that being painful. So there are a lot of different types of touch. As I mentioned before, the organ that's responsible for sensing these types of touch is the skin. So Willem talked about these nociceptors in the skin that are responsible for sensing painful heat. Well, in addition to sensing painful heat, some of them are responsible for sensing painful touch stimulus. And along with them, there are other touch receptors that are responsible for sensing all of the different types of touch that we have. Some of them are just in the skin, and some of them end on hairs. So they kind of feel how those hairs are deflecting. That's how you might feel like a breeze on you or something like that. You feel those hairs moving. So these touch receptors, they sense that touch stimulus in the skin, and then that leads to an action potential in these receptors that goes to the spine and innervates neurons in the spine. This signal then gets taken back up to the brain where it can be interpreted as touch. So as I was mentioning before, there are lots of different types of touch that we feel, and the way that we distinguish these types of touch are different types of touch receptors. So I'm not going to talk about all these here. I mostly put this picture up here just to demonstrate the kind of wide array of different types of cells that we have for sensing touch. So for instance, we have these sensory neurons that innervate hairs on our body that are responsible for sensing things like a light brush. Versus we have deeper touch receptors that are responsible for sensing something like if you have maybe you have your cell phone on your skin or something like that. You have your cell phone in your hand and you feel it vibrate. You got a text message. So those touch receptors help you feel vibration. And then you also have touch receptors that are responsible for sensing pain and things like this. So we have all these different types of neurons in our skin that are responsible for sensing different types of touch. And it's the combination of activation of these neurons that make touch such a diverse sense. So if we go back, so one of the things that's really also interesting about these is that depending on where you are in the body and what different types of receptors you have there, you're better able to discriminate different points of touch. And the way you do this is different touch receptors have different sizes of receptive fields. So if you were to look at these sensory neurons innervating, for instance, the back of your hand, we have lots of these nerves innervating the back of our hand. The area in which they are sensitive to mechanical stimuli is called their receptive field. These receptive fields overlay a little bit, and activation of different neurons is what makes it able for us to distinguish between different stimuli. So like it's how I can feel, for instance, that I'm putting 2 fingers on my hand versus only being able to feel that there's something on my hand. So in this example, if you were to stimulate this hand in kind of 2 faraway parts where you're activating 2 receptive fields, then you'll feel 2 distinct points of touch. On the other hand, if you were to have 2 stimuli that are way too close together, then you might only be activating this neuron. And even though you have 2 points of touch that are touching your hand, you only feel it as one. So what do you guys think would happen if you make these receptive fields bigger? Would you be better at sensing different stimuli, or would you be worse at sensing different stimuli? So for instance, so we've got up here, we've got, this is what we have on the presentation right now. These are our receptive fields overlaid. What if the receptive fields got a lot bigger? What if they looked like this instead? Would you be better at sensing different points of touch, or would you be worse at sensing different points of touch? Worse? Why? Who said worse? Great, yeah, so why? Exactly. That's exactly right. And it's kind of a counterintuitive concept, but that is exactly right. So did everybody get that? If you've got, like, let's say you're stimulating two neurons right here that are, man, this, I'm gonna find a different marker. Here we go. Let's say that you have two separate touch stimuli that are separated by this distance right here. If you've got small receptive fields, then you sense them here as two different stimuli. If you do the same pair of stimuli here with the same distance of separation, you're only activating one of these receptive fields. And so you feel these 2 points, even though they're 2 points, you feel it only as 1 point. So we'll be doing a demo with this, so we'll kind of hit home this point, but it's a really interesting one. And depending on the type of touch that you're talking about, all of these different touch receptors have different sizes of receptive fields. So for instance, your receptive field for sensing vibration is far larger than that for sensing painful stimuli. Do people have any comments about that? Why that might make sense? Or so vibration often isn't going to hurt you. That's not going to cause you a lot of damage, right? But if you're getting hurt, then it's really important to be able to pinpoint exactly where that pain is coming from. So you want small receptive fields so that you can localize exactly where it is. With the large receptive fields, you can say like, oh, the pain's coming from like somewhere around here. But with the small ones, you can say like, oh, it's coming right here, and I need to fix that. So if we go back up to the level of the skin, you can think of all of these different types of touch receptors innervating different spots of the body and going up to the brain to tell you that you're feeling touch. And it goes up to a special area of the brain called the somatosensory cortex. And the somatosensory cortex is organized in such a way that touch information from different parts of the body all comes to the same place. So you have all the sensory information from, for instance, your torso coming to the same place, and then all the sensory information from, say, your face coming to the same place. And the size of this part of the brain dedicated to sensing different parts of the body kind of gives you an idea of how touch sensitive that part of the body is. So what are the parts of the somatosensory cortex that you see that have kind of a huge a huge representation here? So we have some parts of this brain area that are hugely representative of given parts of the body.
Hand kind of has its own little.
Exactly. Yeah, hand has a huge part, and it looks almost as big as like the portion dedicated to the leg or something like that. The leg's a lot bigger than the hand, but we still have a lot more of this area devoted to the hand. Why might that make sense?
Use our hands more, like use our hands for like
Finding.
finding.
Yeah, exactly. This is how we interact with our environment when it comes to touch, right? How about other areas that are over? And I mean here, that's just the hand. This is, we have an even bigger part dedicated to the fingers. Huge part here. Almost as big as our torso.
Which part would also have to be like the tongue?
Tongue? Yeah, that's a huge part, right? Why might tongue be important for sensing touch?
Tasting.
Yeah, it kind of comes into taste, right? Being able to feel different textures of food. And then also making sure you don't want to like swallow something prickly or something like that, right? That wouldn't be good for breathing. You could obstruct your airway. We've also got a huge representation of the face here, like the eye and the lips. So the lips kind of goes into tasting, right? You don't want to put stuff in your mouth that's going to make you choke. How about your eyes? Why might you have a huge part of this, part of your brain devoted to how you feel touch in your eyes or around your eyes? Right, yeah, we are visual organisms. We rely on our sense of vision to really interact with the environment, and you don't want something obstructing your eyesight, yeah, or endangering your eyes. Exactly. So one way of visualizing this representation in the somatosensory cortex is using a funny little dude called the homunculus. So the homunculus is drawn, his body is drawn to the scale of the representation in the somatosensory cortex. So you have huge face, especially lips and tongue that are hugely touch sensitive. You have huge hands, of course, because that's how we're interacting with our environment. Huge, pretty big feet, and also big genitals, because that's another part that's extremely touch sensitive. So this is another way of kind of visualizing how we sense touch. And people have also drawn these for different touch-sensitive organisms. So we've got our star-nosed mole that has a huge star organ. In reality, it's just the size of a fingertip. But in this representation, this is really where it's gathering a lot of its touch information. And the same thing goes for the naked mole rat. It's gathering a lot of its touch information in its incisors, and then also in those hairs coming off its body. So now what we're going to be going into is we're going to be testing our light touch sensitivity. So we're going to be sensing our ability, or testing our ability to pick up on light touch. And this is a test that's used in the clinic to look at hypersensitivity to light touch. That can happen, for instance, when you get injured. Sometimes you can think of, like, say you get a burn on your arm or something like that. Sometimes if you touch that, or a sunburn even, if you touch that, even light touch can be painful. So this is a way of kind of assessing hypersensitivity to touch, and also looking at neuropathies where sometimes your nerves aren't picking up touch the right way. It's kind of the opposite problem. And then we're also going to be doing a 2-point discrimination test, where we're going to be finding the minimum distance at which we can discriminate 2 separate points. And this is another test that's used in the clinic for assessing peripheral nerve damage, where you might have some of those sensory nerves dying and making it harder for you to distinguish different types of touch. So now we're going to split into even groups.
So let's do 4